She was finishing up at her own pool when a neighbor stormed over, demanding explanations. Minutes later, the police arrived, but they weren't there for the reason she expected. Sharon inhaled deeply as the sun sank behind the treetops, casting a golden shimmer over the water. The pool at her boutique rental estate, a property she had invested her heart and soul into for nearly a decade, sparkled in the diminishing light. It was her nightly routine. She would personally check the chlorine levels, straighten the lounge chairs, and secure the gates. Guests arrived here anticipating tranquility, and she ensured they received it. She cherished this place. It wasn't merely a business to her. It represented years of sacrifice. She recalled the struggle of obtaining the loan, battling for permits, and managing every aspect of maintenance herself when she couldn't afford to hire help. Yet, all of it had been worthwhile. Now, the estate was thriving, attracting upscale visitors who appreciated its exclusivity. As she adjusted the latch on the pool gate and turned to leave, she heard a voice behind her. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" Sharon hesitated, already aware of where this was headed. She turned to see a woman in her mid-50s, arms crossed, standing at the edge of the rental property. The woman wore that look, chin slightly raised, squinting as if Sharon were an equation she couldn't quite solve. "I'm closing the pool for the evening," Sharon stated, keeping her tone steady. The woman stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "You work here?" Sharon studied her for a moment, fully aware of what the woman was implying, but she wasn't in the mood for games. "I own this property," she replied plainly. The woman blinked, as if trying to process the information. Then, without missing a beat, she scoffed. "Oh, really?" Her voice dripped with disbelief. "That's interesting because I happen to know the owner." Sharon tilted her head. "Do you?" "Yes," the woman asserted firmly. "This is a high-end rental. I don't think the owner would be okay with some random person locking things up." Sharon exhaled slowly, willing herself to remain calm. "I am the owner. My name is Sharon Matthews. I bought this place in 2014. But the woman wasn't listening. She was already reaching for her phone. "You need to leave," she said. "I'm calling the police." Sharon let out a humorless chuckle. "You're calling the police on me? On my own property?" "Exactly. If you really own this place, then you won't mind proving it to the officers when they arrive." And just like that, she pressed the call button. But Sharon knew this wasn't about proof. It never was. Sharon crossed her arms, watching as the woman paced a few steps away. Phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, I need officers at the Lakeview estate. There's someone trespassing. She's locking up the pool like she owns the place." The woman's voice dripped with urgency, her free hand waving as if she were narrating a crime in progress. Sharon could hear the muffled response from the dispatcher, though she already knew how this conversation would unfold. The woman's tone shifted slightly, her confidence wavering. "No, I don't know her name," she admitted, "but she's here, and she refuses to leave." Sharon let out a slow breath, rolling her shoulders back. She had dealt with people like this before, those who assumed, questioned, and policed without reason. But this was something else. The woman turned back to Sharon, her eyes gleaming with a smug sense of authority. "The police are on their way," she announced, slipping the phone into her pocket. "I'd suggest you stay put." Sharon raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I'm not going anywhere." The woman blinked, seemingly thrown off by the lack of fear in Sharon's voice. "Good," she said, straightening her posture, "because when they get here, you're going to have a lot of explaining to do." Sharon sighed, glancing toward the row of luxury rental villas. A few guests were outside on their patios, enjoying their evening and sipping wine. One couple turned their heads toward the commotion, watching with mild curiosity. "Let me get this straight," Sharon said, leveling her gaze at the woman. "You saw me, a black woman, closing a pool, and instead of asking a single follow-up question, you just assumed I didn't belong here?" The woman's mouth twisted. "Oh, don't pull the race card." Sharon smirked. "I don't need to pull anything. You did that all on your own." The woman's face darkened. "I don't know what kind of scam you're running, but I know this property is owned by someone else. I've lived in this neighborhood for 10 years. I know who comes and goes." Sharon let out a soft laugh. Oh, then what's my name? The woman faltered. What? My name? If you know the owner, then you should know my name. The woman's lips parted, but no words emerged. Sharon took a step closer, lowering her voice. You don't, do you? Because you don't know the owner. You just assume that someone like me couldn't possibly be her. The woman bristled. You're twisting my words. Sharon shook her head. No, I'm laying them out exactly as you said them. The woman glanced toward the road, shifting on her feet. Maybe she was realizing she had made a mistake. Maybe not. But before she could say anything else, the distant wail of sirens broke through the evening air. Sharon sighed. This was about to get interesting. The flashing blue and red lights washed over the estate as two patrol cars pulled up near the main entrance. Sharon stood her ground, arms relaxed at her sides, while the woman, who still hadn't bothered to introduce herself, took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and marched toward the officers as if she had personally summoned reinforcements. The first officer to step out was a tall man with sharp features and a no-nonsense demeanor. His partner, shorter but stockier, followed closely behind. Both scanned the area, assessing the situation. The woman wasted no time. Officers! Thank goodness you're here, she called, motioning toward Sharon as if she were pointing out an intruder. She was trying to close the pool, acting like she owns the place. I told her to leave, but she refused. Sharon let out a slow exhale. Here we go. The lead officer turned his gaze to her. Ma'am, do you live here? No, Sharon replied evenly. I own this property. The woman scoffed. No, she does not. The officer glanced between them, then turned back to Sharon. Do you have any identification or proof of ownership? Sharon nodded and calmly reached into her pocket. She wasn't about to make any sudden moves, not with the way things could go sideways in situations like this. She pulled out her wallet and handed the officer her driver's license. I also have property documents inside, she added. If you like, I can grab them. The officer took the ID and studied it before glancing at the woman. Ma'am, what's your relation to this property? The woman faltered. I live nearby. I've seen the owner before, and I know this isn't her. The officer didn't react. He simply turned back to Sharon. Miss Matthews, what exactly happened here? Sharon crossed her arms. I was locking up my pool like I do every night when she gestured toward the woman, decided I didn't belong and called you. The officer's face remained unreadable, but something in his eyes shifted. He looked at Sharon again, his gaze lingering a little longer this time. Then his expression changed just slightly. Wait a minute, he muttered, staring at her ID again. His partner leaned over to peek, then raised an eyebrow. Sharon Matthews? The first officer repeated, almost as if he were confirming it to himself. Then suddenly his posture relaxed, and his face lit up with recognition. Oh, man, he said, shaking his head. I know you. The woman stiffened. What? Sharon arched an eyebrow. Do you? Yeah. The officer nodded, handing back her ID. You were on the news a few years back. Didn't you run that community outreach program in Oakland? Sharon tilted her head slightly, a hint of amusement creeping in. That depends. Which one? The officer chuckled. The one with the scholarship fund. My cousin's kid got a grant through that program. Sharon smiled. Small world. The woman's mouth opened and closed, her confidence cracking just a little. But the officer wasn't done. He turned back to her, his expression unreadable. And you said she was trespassing? The woman faltered. I thought she was. You thought? The officer's voice was calm but firm. Did you ask her any questions before calling us? The woman swallowed hard. I just... But now it was clear the situation was no longer in her favor. The woman's confidence wavered as the weight of the officer's words sank in. Her arms, once crossed defiantly over her chest, now hung stiffly at her sides, her eyes darting between Sharon and the officer, searching for some kind of way out, some justification for what she had done. The officer turned his full attention to her now, his voice steady but firm. You called us claiming there was a trespasser, but you never actually checked if she belonged here. The woman's mouth opened, then closed. I assumed. That's the problem. Sharon interrupted, folding her arms. You assumed. The woman let out a nervous breath. I just thought. No, you didn't think, Sharon shot back. You didn't ask, you didn't verify. You just saw me, and that was enough. The second officer, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke. Ma'am, did she at any point threaten you? The woman hesitated. No. But did she refuse to leave your property? Another pause. Well, no. But then why exactly did you feel the need to call the police? The woman's face burned red. I thought I was helping. If she wasn't supposed to be here, then Sharon let out a humorless chuckle. You were so sure I wasn't supposed to be here that you had no problem calling the cops on me. The first officer sighed, glancing at his partner before shaking his head. This isn't a police matter. Miss Matthews owns this property. There was no crime, no trespassing, nothing for us to investigate. The woman swallowed hard. I see that now. Sharon narrowed her eyes. Do you? The woman looked like she wanted to say something else, but no words came. The realization of what she had done, how wrong she had been, was settling in. The first officer turned back to Sharon. Miss Matthews, I apologize for the inconvenience. Sharon exhaled slowly, nodding. I appreciate that. He hesitated before adding, I also just want to say your work really made a difference for a lot of people. I'm sorry you had to deal with this tonight. The woman's head snapped toward him. Wait, so she's a Sheriff Matthews? The second officer let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. Yep. Sharon studied the woman's face as the realization hit her. Whatever she had assumed about Sharon, that she was some stranger sneaking around an upscale property, that she couldn't possibly own a place like this, had just been shattered. But the damage was already done, and now it was her turn to sit with the consequences. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. The woman, who had been so sure of herself just minutes ago, now looked like she wanted the ground to swallow her whole. Sharon could see it in her eyes, the slow, creeping realization that she had made a fool of herself, that she had humiliated herself. No, Sharon, I didn't know, the woman muttered, her voice quieter now. Sharon tilted her head. Didn't know what? The woman fidgeted. I didn't know you were you. Sharon let out a sharp laugh. Oh, so if I were just some random woman, you'd still think I didn't belong? The woman's lips pressed together. That's not what I meant. Sharon's voice was steady, but there was an edge to it now. It's exactly what you meant. She took a slow step forward. Let me guess. You assumed the owner would be someone else. Someone who looked different than me? The woman swallowed hard, saying nothing. The first officer crossed his arms. You know Miss Matthews could file a false report complaint against you for this. The woman's eyes widened. I wasn't trying to cause trouble. The second officer shook his head. You wasted our time because you didn't take 5 seconds to ask a question before calling us. The woman's cheeks flushed deep red. I didn't think. Sharon raised a brow. That much is clear. The guests at this estate were still watching from their balconies, whispering. A couple near the pool had pulled out their phones, possibly recording. The woman had made a spectacle, and now she was the center of it. Sharon sighed, shaking her head. You came here with so much certainty, and now you can't even look me in the eye. The woman glanced toward the patrol cars, as if she wanted an escape, but there was none. Sharon inhaled deeply, forcing herself to release the tension building in her chest. She didn't want to waste another second on this woman. She turned to the officers. Are we done here? The first officer nodded. Unless you want to file a complaint. Sharon studied the woman for a long moment, then exhaled sharply. No, she's already embarrassed herself enough tonight. The woman flinched as Sharon turned, heading toward her estate. But before she stepped inside, she called over her shoulder, just loud enough for everyone to hear. Next time, think before you pick up the phone. And with that, the night was over. The air outside felt different now. Heavier, charged with the kind of energy that lingers after a storm. The officers returned to their cars, their radios crackling as they received another call. With one last glance toward Sharon, the lead officer gave her a respectful nod before sliding into the driver's seat. Sharon didn't return it. She was too tired for pleasantries. The woman, who still hadn't offered her name, stood there, shoulders tense, eyes darting between the retreating patrol cars and the few guests still watching from their balconies. The hum of whispers carried through the night. The very people she had probably wanted to impress were now staring at her like she was a problem. And she shifted uncomfortably, as if she wanted to say something to fix this, to save face. But what could she possibly say now? Sharon didn't wait for an apology that wasn't coming. She turned on her heel and walked toward her front door. "Wait," the woman blurted. Sharon stopped but didn't turn around. The woman hesitated, then sighed. "I made a mistake." Sharon exhaled through her nose, gripping the doorknob. "Yeah, you did." Another pause. "I just thought." The woman trailed off as if realizing how hollow her excuses sounded. "I didn't mean what?" Sharon cut in, finally turning to face her. "Didn't mean to call the cops on me. Didn't mean to assume I was a trespasser on my own damn property." The woman flinched at Sharon's sharp tone. "I was just trying to look out for the neighborhood," she murmured weakly. Sharon let out a humorless laugh. Were you just trying to ensure someone like me knew their place?" The woman's face twisted, but she didn't deny it. "That's what I thought," Sharon muttered, shaking her head. "Go home." The woman lingered for a second longer, as if she still wanted to salvage the situation. But there was nothing left to say. Defeated, she turned and walked away, disappearing into shadows of the neighborhood she thought she was protecting. Sharon stood in the doorway for a long moment, letting the cool night air settle around her. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but she wouldn't let it consume her. She had worked too hard to let a stranger's ignorance steal her peace, and tonight that peace was hers to reclaim. Sharon closed the door behind her, the sound echoing through the quiet house. She leaned against it for a moment, exhaling slowly, letting the tension in her shoulders dissolve bit by bit. She wasn't shaken. She refused to be, but the weight of the night sat heavy in her chest. She moved toward the kitchen, reaching for a glass of water. Her hands were steady despite the anger still humming beneath her skin. This wasn't the first time someone had looked at her and decided she didn't belong. It probably wouldn't be the last. But tonight felt different. Maybe it was because she had built this place from the ground up, pouring years of sweat and sacrifice into making it exactly what it was. Or maybe it was because the woman had been so certain, so unshakably sure, that Sharon couldn't possibly own something this beautiful, this successful. And when she realized she had been wrong, she couldn't even say the words, "I'm sorry." That was the part that stayed with her, not the confrontation, not even officers showing up, but the woman's refusal to admit what was obvious. Sharon took a slow sip of water, her mind drifting to the guests who had witnessed everything. Would they think twice now before making assumptions? Or would they tell the story later, shaking their heads at what had unfolded before them? Either way, it didn't really matter. She knew who she was. She knew what she had built. And no one, not some nosy neighbor, not even the police,